Game Beard.
All right, it's time for another Game Beard video, and today we're going to do a quick one. We're talking about wet palettes. And what's a wet palette? A wet palette is a palette that you can use that's wet, and it can keep your paint fresher and lasting longer. But there's many awesome videos about making wet palettes, so go watch those. But if you want a man on the street level, a gamer of many years, a no-nonsense gamer's wet palette, this is it, right? Notice how tiny this thing is. First, do I use wet palettes? I do like wet palettes, but I don't use them very often. I just like to use my regular palette, right? And I mix a lot of water with my paint, and I usually use my paint when I'm doing it, so I don't have to use a wet palette that much. But sometimes when I get big projects and I mix a certain color and I want to keep it, I use a wet palette. But the most important reason or use of a wet palette is when it gets really warm and hot and your paint dries out while you're painting. And so that's the most common use of a wet palette, and it's summer over here, and I need to start using a wet palette. Now, when do I use a wet palette? I usually use a wet palette on a couple colors. Usually it's my my edging or my highlights. When I'm painting it, the paint will dry in my brush. So, and it'll dry on my palette too, like really fast. So I definitely use, this is when I normally use wet palettes. I use it for highlighting. Okay, so how do you make a wet palette? Well, wet palettes, I think Army Painter makes a wet palette. You can buy a fancy, expensive one. But what I recommend are these sandwich lunch containers that you can buy anywhere, like at Target. So here is, it's like a sandwich. Look at that. I'm not even bothering to, I guess I could move my camera. I'm not going to. This is like a little sandwich box. And you can buy these at Target, and these work great. They're also really cheap, and they seal. The nice thing is, they're so cheap, I buy a bunch of these and I'll label them. So this is like white. I'll like white, black colors, and I'll kind of keep them. I'll stack them up. Again, I don't use these very often, but when I do, I'll have specific palettes for like certain colors. What I've been using, let's see, I have a bigger one somewhere. Oh, no, not. That's funny, I didn't bring it up. They have like a bigger sandwich one. It's like twice the size of this. So, I mean, it's up to you. You can get bigger ones, but this is pretty good. And like I said, it's good enough. It's great. It's cheap. Okay, but look at this. I got this little guy. My wife got this thing, right? And it's like for vegetables or carrots, like that you put in a kid's lunchbox, right? But this thing's tiny. And the biggest problem I have with a wet palette like this, a big one, a sandwich one, and it's okay. It's okay because it's cheap, right? But like, I have to like put my hand is above the paint, and it sucks. Like, it's more difficult to use. So that's why if you bought a fancy like Army Painter wet palette, it may not have that issue, like the height, right? So that sucks. But I solved it with this little itty bitty one. And I usually only use like one color. I usually use my Men-Off highlight, right? And so what I do is, I don't even use the bottom. Like, I use the lid, because I can still seal it. Like, I seal the bottom on top of the lid. I use the lid for my wet palette, and my hand can rest right on the edge and get my paint, and it's pretty convenient. Like I said, I usually use my highlight colors, 1 or 2, and this works awesome. So I highly recommend a little vegetable box, and then use the lid, right? And then you put this is the new lid. The bottom is the new lid, and I put it on. Okay, so how do we make a wet palette? First, what do you need? You need paper towels. So here's paper towel. Yay, paper towel. You also need this weird stuff called parchment paper. Parchment paper. The nice thing about the parchment paper is, I don't know if they all have this, but this one's like, it has these guides that you can help to cut to get the right size. That's kind of awesome. So parchment paper. They use it for cooking, so you'll find it with like, saran wrap and tinfoil and stuff like that. But basically you cut it down. Now, how many plies of paper towel are you going to use? I use 2. I use two. So I definitely fold it in half. I don't use like one side. That's not enough. I use two. And in all honesty, I could probably use more than this. So I leave it up to you. Maybe I could do this twice, right? 4 plies instead of 2. 2 works pretty good. But you want to cut it down so that it fits nicely into your lid or tray, right? Then you're gonna wet it. We're gonna wet it. I'll show you. We'll wet it, and then you're gonna put the parchment paper on top of it, right? And you know what's funny is I just have like a big, like, I didn't just get this for the demonstration. I just have this on my desk, right? And so it's like, oh, I need like this will dry out eventually. I just throw it out, cut a new one, right, and put it on. I get a new paper towel. Okay, so I got it. So I got my parchment paper. The parchment paper is going to go on top. Before I do that, though, I need to wet this paper towel. Some guys, like, they'll have like a thin sponge, That seems like a cool way to do it. But whatever works for you is fine by me, right? But this is virtually nothing, right? Now, I'm going to get some water. I have a little eyedropper here, right? And I'm just going to drop it in. Let's see. You can be kind of generous. Let's see. I let it kind of seep in around. Can you see that? Let's see. It feels pretty wet. Not bad. Okay. Then, that feels pretty good. Then what you want to do is you want to lay this parchment paper on. Now notice how it's like, it's bending upward, so I'm going to try to force it down. It feels like it's the same on both sides, so here we go. Just going to stick it in. Stick it in there. You have to kind of, you might get, ooh, look, now it's curling. It's curling the other way. Oh, that's really delightful. Oh, look at that. What is up with that? Fine. You try it this way. Okay. Sometimes you'll get little wrinkles and bubbles, and I don't know. It's not the end of the world. It's kind of a bummer. You might find a way, but that's it. There's my wet palette. It's done. So I'll add my paint when I'm done. I'll put my lid on. Sometimes I usually leave this on my table, but it'll dry out. Some people they throw it in the fridge. I think the fridge, you know, helps it dry out less. Anyways, here it is. It doesn't feel very wet. That might be okay though. Okay. Ooh, it's starting to peel up. Don't do that. Okay, I'm gonna get my favorite color. Menoff highlight. I got my junky brush. I'm actually going to get a little wet. Just going to put some here. I'm going to put it right here so I can get it easily. Can you see that? No, of course not. There you go. Well, I could have done a red. That would have been better for the video. Would have been a better visual, but I really don't care. Okay, so let's see. I'll tilt it. There, you can see it. When you use a wet palette, let's try it. I guess I'm going to put it right here so you can see it. When you use a wet palette, the paint is thinner than normal. And that might be alarming. It's looking pretty good. There's some highlights. Let's see. There. All right. Here I do some more. But anyways, it's nice. Oh, see, I used pure white for that, so I guess I'm not doing that here. Looks like I already did this. Okay, but anyways, it works good. I like to use, like I said, I like to use my wet palette for when I'm highlighting. Because that's the last step, and I'll have like a bunch of guys, right? Maybe like 10, 15 guys, and I'll get my wet palette out, usually just with a couple colors, my highlight colors, and I'll do it, because that way my paint doesn't dry out. It still dries in my brush. It's terrible when it gets hot. But anyways, that's what you do. But a lot of people use wet palettes for all their colors. Sometimes the moisture from the palette really interferes with See, it's drippy there. It interferes with, you know, how it paints. So I don't use it all the time. Give it a try, though. You should definitely use it. My, you know, some people live their whole lives without using a wet palette, and they're fine, you know. But like I said, I like it. I'm not going to say anything against it. But here's my bigger one. So let's try it. So again, I'm going to get a bunch of water this time. But I like it, especially when it gets hot. When it's hot, I need that wet palette so that my paint doesn't dry out on my palette, and it's like a real bummer. So to me, that's the best use. But give it a try. It's definitely, it's cheap. You have no excuse when you get this stuff. Okay, so this is my sandwich box. Okay, let's see. I'm going to put this in here. The parchment goes on top, right? You got it. Let's see, this one feels a little, like I got more water in there. Yeah. You kind of don't want it sopping wet, but you saw I got a decent amount of water in there. There it is. Then I can add my paint, and this will save your paint. It'll save it for a couple days, longer if you're more careful, or if you throw it in the fridge, or if you use a wet sponge or whatever. But that's it. So that's a wet palette. I highly recommend you do it, but give it a try on one of these small ones. Are you only using a couple colors like me? This is my favorite thing. They sell all kinds of expensive wet palettes, but this is it. This is all I need. This thing, I'm sure this wasn't expensive. I previously had it. It was for vegetables, right? Carrots. But this was awesome. So I totally confiscated this thing, and I use it all the time. But that's it. That's wet palettes. So definitely give wet palettes a try. Let me know if you like them or not. Leave a comment. Leave a nice comment. If you leave a bad comment, yeah, thanks. But yeah, let me know. I'm on the. I like wet palettes. But I'm not as crazy about them as other people. I definitely use them, and they're worthwhile. But they're practically free, so give it a try, especially if it's warm out and your paint is drying on your palette. You definitely got to try it then. There's really no excuse. But that's it for today. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.